Honorable Attorney General of the Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis, Mr. Vincent Byron Jr., Mr. Michael Edinburgh, QC, Mrs. Louise Van Grunen, World Intellectual Property Organization Director of the Division for Building Respect for Intellectual Property, Ms. Jehan Williams, Registrar of the Intellectual Property Office and other staff members of the Intellectual Property Office, Mr. Valston Graham, Director of Public Prosecutions, law enforcement and other officials of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis and the Nevis Island Administration, esteemed members of the media, good morning. As you may be aware, intellectual property rights is the right of an individual or group to own and benefit from the tangible and intangible creation of their own minds. Here in St. Kitts and Nevis, the Intellectual Property Office was established through the facilitation of Section 63 of the Constitution to protect the rights of intellectual property rights holders and enable them to enjoy exclusivity in the exploitation of their intellectual property. As a natural consequence of providing this protection, the Intellectual Property Office plays a pivotal role not only in the economic diversification and wealth creation at a national level, but also as a partner in the cooperative global effort to afford enforcement of intellectual property rights wherever and whenever possible. Today, in keeping with our mandate, we hope to further our efforts to fully align ourselves with our regional and international obligations. Over the next 2 days, we shall be charting the course for this phase in our development through the open and frank exchange of information, where we will examine our status regarding enforcement of intellectual property rights against the required goal of compliance. This is a first step in scrutinizing the existing legislative and logistical framework and determining the adjustments needed to achieve this end. I end here by extending thanks on behalf of the Intellectual Property Office to all present for their attendance and look forward to your contribution. I now ask you to please join me in welcoming to the podium our next speaker, Mrs. Louise Van Grunen, World Intellectual Property Organization Director in the Division for Building Respect for Intellectual Property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Honorable Vincent Byron, Attorney General, it's a pleasure to have you here this morning for the opening. And also Ms. Williams, thank you very much for inviting the organization to participate with you in hosting this event. We also welcome warmly our expert, Mr. Edinburgh from London, and each one of you. It is really a pleasure to be here this morning, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to spend the next 2 days, a day and a half with you, to look at the enforcement of intellectual property rights in a balanced way. Bearing this in mind, we will look at what is required from us in terms of obligations under the TRIPS agreement, but we will balance it out with Recommendation 45 of the WIPO Development Agenda. The purpose is that we should use intellectual property rights for the development, both for the users and the manufacturers of intellectual property rights, producers of intellectual property rights. So the whole purpose would be to look at what options and flexibilities we have in our compliance with these obligations. As far as the Advisory Committee on Enforcement is concerned, this is the body in WIPO where we look at all the topical issues in relation to enforcement, and we balance that out with awareness, which is very important to make sure that we get the public on board, because without the participation of the public, to decrease the demand for infringing goods, we are not going to be successful. My first presentation I will devote to explain to you this concept of building respect for IP. So at this moment, I will stop here only by thanking you very much for being here, and we will try to follow a schedule which will also fit with your departure at the end of the afternoon to make sure that you all will benefit from all the presentations. So thank you, warmly welcome here, warmly welcome to our speakers, and thank you very much to our hosts for organizing this event.
We will now invite the Honorable Attorney General to deliver remarks on behalf of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Thank you very much, Madam Master of Ceremonies, Miss Nicholas and Catherine, who is our Assistant Registrar of Intellectual Property. While I would like to adopt the protocol that has already been established, I think it would be remiss of me not to recognize with us Miss Louise Van Goonen, who is the WIPO Director of Building Respect for Intellectual Property Division. And also I'd want to recognize Mr. Michael Edinburgh, QC, who is here from London to help us facilitate this workshop. Of course, I have to recognize the Registrar of Intellectual Property, Ms. Jehan Williams, as well. I think I should also recognize here the Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Valston Graham, who has taken time out from his busy schedule to be with us this morning. And I know that I also have one of my counsel from the Attorney General's chambers here, who I'd be remiss not to mention, Ms. Violet Williams. To all law enforcement and other officials of the government and from the Nevis Island Administration, as well as those of the media who are here, we want to welcome all of you and say good morning. It is a pleasure for me, as Minister of Justice and Legal Affairs, under whose ministry the Intellectual Property Office, St. Kitts and Nevis, falls, to welcome you to this WIPO-IPO workshop on enforcement of intellectual property rights. The workshop is designed for law enforcement officials today and half day tomorrow, and also for our magistrates as well, who should be here tomorrow afternoon. The workshop is jointly staged by the World Intellectual Property Organization, as well as the St. Kitts and Nevis Intellectual Property Office. I want to welcome each and every one of you here, and in particular, I must again welcome and thank very much for being here with us, our facilitators, Ms. Van Goonen and Mr. Edinburgh QC. I hope Ms. Van Goonen does not mind if I mention briefly that she is an attorney or advocate who has been called to the bar in South Africa, and at one time she was a prosecutor in criminal matters there. She has lectured law and was the Registrar of Patents, Trademarks, Copyright, and Designs of South Africa before joining WIPO in 1996. She has risen through the ranks at the World Intellectual Property Organization, and in her capacity as Director of Building Respect for the IP Division, she is responsible for policy dialogue in the context of WIPO Advisory Committee on Enforcement. She brings us a lot of experience in working with developing countries to strengthen the whole program of intellectual property and we welcome you and hope that we'll all benefit from your work here. At the same time, I would want to mention and say briefly about Mr. Michael Edinburgh, who is a Queen's Counsel, who gained Silk in 2010. He is a member of the Searle Court Chambers in London and has vast experience as in the field of intellectual property. He's an expert, having had more than 100 cases at the Appeal Division. He has appeared before the European Court in a whole range of matters, and he has acted as Controller General of Patents, the Registrar of Trademarks, and the UK government before the Court of Justice of the European Union, the House of Lords, the Court of Appeal, and the High Court, both Chancery Division and Patents Court, and inter alia, appeals from the Patent Office and the Registry. He has been instructed by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys, the Institute of Trademark Attorneys, and AP UK to advise and act for them in the Court of Justice and the Supreme Court. He appears regularly before the General Court of the European Union, formerly the Court of First Instance, Luxembourg, on appeals from these bodies. Mr. Edinburgh QC is indeed an expert, and he brings with us a vast knowledge and experience in all of this. So, when we come to have this workshop, we believe, will prepare those of us here properly to understand what intellectual property is, to understand the need to protect rights, those who register their trademarks and other intellectual property with us here in St. Kitts, but also, and particularly, especially, what our own people need to be aware of in order to protect their own rights, their own property rights, and so forth. I trust that you will be able, outside the intense 2 days of work that you have ahead of you, that you will find opportunities, however small, to enjoy the beauty and charm of St. Kitts and Nevis as well. And so that you'll be wanting to come back again and again and again and bring your families with you. What is IP? Intellectual property, and Ms. St. Catherine said it briefly. I don't want to go into any long thing because you will be hearing most of this shortly in the various presentations that will happen for you. But I think that is important for those who may not be familiar with what intellectual property is, to say briefly what this important area is for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Intellectual property is where we create things with our mind. It's very, very important that we understand what this means. We have found here in St. Kitts and Nevis that there are many of us who from time to time devise, create stuff, art. We create music. We create products which we put brands on, labels on, for sale, for export. And we must be aware of what the value is to us, not just in terms of making money, but in terms of protecting our own property. Intellectual property refers to creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary, and artistic works, designs and symbols, names and images used in commerce. Traditionally, we in St. Kitts and Nevis have registered trademarks from all around the world. We have various products that come. Commercial house wants to introduce a new brand of cheese. Any type of product for sale, we normally would register that trademark at the Intellectual Property Office. So there is a whole register of trademarks that we have done going back many, many years. And so the protection of these products through trademarks, how does somebody breach that protection, abuse it? And we'll hear from the experts later in the presentation they make exactly how this is done and how, as law enforcement officials, we have to deal with these matters. I would say that the question of trademarks is nothing new to us, but the area of patents is something which we have been lagging behind. Just recently, in April, the 2nd and 3rd of April as it was, we had with us, coming from Trinidad, the Trinidad and Tobago Office of Intellectual Property, Mr. Ashing, who is an examiner there, Mr. Richard Ashing, who came to work with our office here, with Director Williams and Ms. St. Catherine. And they looked at our whole body of patents. We have a number of them that have actually been registered, but have not really been properly processed. But this is another area that is very much at the center of the whole question of intellectual property. Somebody invents a product, they want it registered so they can get the benefits if other people use it. And so it's an area that we have to strengthen and for us to understand. We in St. Kitts and Nevis must thank very much the World Intellectual Property Office organization for the assistance over the years. We have been a part of that body. We have attended workshops and their meetings over time. And as recently as September 2015, we have had the benefit of them assisting us in developing and installing the IPAS system software to help us to be more efficient in the recording, the processing of intellectual property. The IPAS system is an industrial property automation system that allows us now to record on database and to process these matters and make it available. We hope that in the not-too-distant future, we'll be able to make it accessible online, so that would assist in the whole process of intellectual property. The Government of National Unity of St. Kitts and Nevis places great store in intellectual property rights, especially when it comes to our emerging young people, their art, their poetry, and in particular, the many compositions of song which they record and which are published and played on airways all over. The Infamouses, the Nichibis, and these who produce more highlights, produce much of their work. We would want that the works be protected, that they can get commercial benefit when they produce works of this nature. And so a lot of what we hear today and tomorrow would be able to be taken away to understand how the compliance aspect of this will be done. But not only in terms of these artistic and cultural aspects of our life would the Intellectual Property Office and WIPO be concerned with, but products. And I can speak locally about food products, our pepper sauces, and various types of products that are processed, that we label for export, for local use, all fall under the aspect of intellectual property, to give a real and tangible aspect of why we are here, to understand how as law enforcement officers, as customs officers, as prosecutors, we can see at the port of entry or when we export where your role becomes an important aspect in this whole workshop that we are dealing with today. Having examined the agenda of the workshop, I'm confident that at the end of these 2 days, our law enforcement and other relevant government officials who interface with matters related to intellectual property will walk away with new knowledge, stronger capacities, and a widened awareness of their roles in protecting and enforcing property rights, intellectual property rights. Your efforts in this exercise fall squarely in the government's overall goal to elevate intellectual property as a viable area of economic, social, and cultural growth, especially in regard to youth entrepreneurship. It is important, then, that our people rest assured that when they create or invest in intellectual property, there are adequate systems in place to protect their creations and investments. Conversely, our people must also be aware that if they fail to observe the intellectual property rights of others, they can be called into account by the law. As you go through your deliberations, I ask that you consider these statistics. In 2013, a WIPO study found that 6.3% of our GDP is hinged on activity in the creative or copyright industries, and 3.1% is engaged in these activities. I note also that in November last year, 2016, out of 175 countries, the United Nations International Telecommunications Union adjudged St. Kitts and Nevis to be the most dynamic and improved information development country, having jumped 20 spots from number 54 to number 34 on the ICT Development Index. And this was no mean feat. We gained 2 awards in Botswana at the ITU meetings there. These statistics clearly confirm that we are a nation small, but punching well above our weight. We're a nation of creators, and our increased use of and capacities in technology can and should be used extensively to facilitate development and growth. Intellectual property is therefore a critical and self-sufficient pillar of our development, and we are certain that the government's investments in technology will be down to increases in IP creation and sharing. As our efforts to raise IP respect and awareness increase, we must ensure that we are equipped to enforce or advise on the attendant rights when instances of infringement occur. As such, it is incumbent on our government to ensure that a robust IP framework is implemented and enforced to protect the interests of our people and those of the world at large. It is crucial, then, that issues relating to the enforcement of intellectual property rights are fully ventilated in the context of the legal framework of St. Kitts and Nevis to ensure that our development goals can be met satisfactorily. That is another seminal reason why the present activity has the full support of our government. I therefore urge each of you to openly and honestly relish the opportunities for growth and inspection over the next 2 days and see this workshop as an important stimulus in our joint efforts to identify and address any deficiencies in our system. I additionally extend these sentiments to the magistrates who will undertake similar capacity building exercise tomorrow afternoon. I anticipate only positive reports of your participation, and I would want to wish each and every one of you the best as we open this workshop here this morning. Thank you very much.
Stay up to date with news, programs, and activities of the government with SKNIS. Like us on Facebook. Listen to us on SoundCloud. Follow us on Twitter. And watch our videos on YouTube. Connect with us today. SKNIS, St. Kitts and Nevis Information Service.